Welcome to today's Cyber Lunch, Temple University Speaker Series exploring the current issues across the cyber landscape. I'm Grace Giraldo, Director of the Cyber Defense and Information Assurance Professional Science Master's Program at the College of Science and Technology at Temple. Our goal for this event is to bring together cyber leaders to be the hub for aligning cyber academia and industry to discuss cyber trends and grow Temple's pipeline of cyber professionals. Today in the agenda, we'll finish introductions. I'm going to share a bit about the cyber program and move right into the panel discussions. But for right now, I'm going to hand it off to Steve.
Thanks, Grace. I'm Steve Nappy, Associate Vice President for Technology Commercialization and Business Development. What that means is I have the pleasure to work within the research arm of Temple University, which conducts over 280 million in research annually. That research has produced over 400 discoveries in the past 5 years. For example, you'll hear from Professor Justin Shi on the panel today, a researcher and innovator that has developed his own technology in the cyber defense field. Consistent with the industry partnered model for this cyber defense and information assurance program, advancing technology out of the university is enabled by business partnerships, including in many cases, the formation of new companies. About 25 active businesses have been spun out from Temple's research and innovation activities. These companies have raised over 70 million already this year, fueling the advancement of our discoveries, and while doing so, contributing to the economy here in Philadelphia and beyond. With that, I'll turn it back to Grace Giraldo to talk about the Cyber Defense and Information Assurance Program.
Thank you, Steve. So I just want to share the spotlight, right? In every cyber lunch, we do a different spotlight. Today is my turn. And I want to talk a little bit about the program because this program is aligned with industries. We look for industry partners. We use industry standards. We got invited like by the FBI to the summit, the Cybersecurity Ransomware Summit. And we work through our Temple Small Business Development Center to create projects that are worked by the students, and we offer it as a service to small businesses for free. So this is how we start aligning, right? We bring in tools from the industry, we use industry standards, like I just said, and all of these projects help the students start building their resume as a student as they go through the different courses. So we wind up contributing, protecting, and informing the community and the industry. We're building up our pipeline to send them off to get those jobs, right? Internships, jobs. And we host this speaker series called Cyber Lunch. Our students create something that's called Cyber in the Box. And that is a cybersecurity awareness activity box that we send to schools to start mentoring younger kids to try to get into the sciences. And of course, through the Small Business Development Partnership, we provide cyber services to small businesses in this region and nationally because they are all connected. So the program itself, just a few tidbits, right? I said it was industry focused. It's a professional science master. So we're looking for working professionals interested in upskilling or learning new skills in cyber. It's hybrid. That means that there are online courses and also in-person courses. And you have the option to do a 30 credit master's or 12 credit certificate. Students can join us part-time or full-time, so the schedule and how fast they finish, it's up to them. So that is my quick spotlight on the program, and I'll pass it back over to Steve for some intros.
Thanks, Grace. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for today to discuss the major cyber issues in the financial industry, including research and industry perspectives on fintech-related cyber concerns. We have Grace Wachovia, Head of Information Security Controls and Governance for Cloud and Strategic Initiatives at TD Bank. Justin Shi, Associate Professor of Computer Science in Temple University's College of Science and Technology. Chris Tate, Principal at Baker Tilly. Derek Fisher, Vice President at InvestNet, also an instructor and advisor at Temple. Welcome to the panel, and I'll turn it back to you, Grace, to kick off the discussion and moderate the panel.
I want to start by thanking everyone for joining us today. Grace, Justin, Chris, and Derek. And I just want to put it out there. I want you guys to jump in and start sharing any industry trend or anecdotal stories that you want to start sharing, and we'll build up the discussion from there. You don't have to wait for me to ask a question. Who wants to start?
Sure, I can start, Grace. Hi, everyone. Chris Tate with Baker Tilly. I've been a partner with Baker Tilly for about 20 years. I've been in this industry for a long time. So I specialize in providing cybersecurity assessment services for financial institutions. So primarily, I'm going to be working with banks or insurance companies. So in the concept of fintechs, I spend a lot of time with fintech organizations or insurtech organizations and the linkage of those organizations into more traditional banking and insurance type of models. So maybe I'll kick it off for the panelists here, right? One of the big topics of when you're talking about fintechs and cybersecurity is what are the big attacks that the businesses are facing right now? You know, we can hear of everything from ransomware to, you know, privacy requirements to credential stuffing, insider threats, and the list of things that can go wrong at organizations goes on and on and on. Maybe I'll frame it up here, and Grace and Derek, maybe you can sort of talk about what trends or attack vectors are you seeing within, you know, either your organization or in the industries that you're serving right now.
So I'll start off. A few trends, so lots of trends, right? I shouldn't say a few, lots of trends. But the things that I want to call out today, one of them is migration to cloud, right? Heavy reliance moving from companies and organizations managing their infrastructure, managing the software within the company and within their constraints, to then relying on vendors to do that. So that's a major risk, and it takes a lot of governance and security and assessments and really trust in order to establish that relationship and to make sure it continues to work. And the other big trend or big shift in focus from an information security perspective is insider threat. So there over the past 15 years or more, there's been a lot of focus on adversaries coming from outside of companies to get into their networks. But over the past few years, there's been a shift in conversation around what about the employees within this firm, people who already have access. How do we make sure, one, they're educated and they don't let external parties in, but two, that they're doing the right things and they're there for the right reasons and they have the firm's ideas front of mind. So these are the top two ones I would call out.
Yeah, and I would just kind of piggyback on that, Grace, and you know, in most of the tech circles in the past, 12, 13 months since we've been in this COVID situation, you'll hear a lot of technology leaders say that they did 3 or 4 years of cloud migration in the span of 3 months. And, our company was no different. And, just my background, I work in application security. So my team's job is to ensure that, the code that we're putting out is secure. We made a quick shift from on-prem to cloud very quickly. And obviously the deployment model, the threat model is vastly different in cloud than it is on-prem. So I think that's been a challenge, not just specifically for fintech, but just in general for every organization, every technology organization having to deal with that rapid migration. In terms of threats, there's, Chris, you mentioned credential stuffing, especially in the fintech space. That's been very hot. The course that I teach at Temple, I try to, I make the example a few times stating that, the person who's rappelling from a helicopter down into your data center and, landing inches off the floor and plugging in a USB to steal data is not the case, right? The way attackers are lazy. So they're going to find ways that they can automate and do things. They can, force multiply and do things in an automated fashion, and credential stuffing is the way that's done. You think about it, your bank credentials, or your credentials to anything, those are the keys to that information. That's it. That's the only thing that stands between an attacker and your data and your financial applications is your password in most cases. So I think that's, everybody recognizes that that's a weak link, and attackers are no different. They're quick to take advantage of that.
I think that's fascinating, right? Derek and Grace talking about the cloud migrations, and I've seen the same thing. The pandemic forced organizations to speed up their implementation of technologies, right? Derek, you talked about what may have been on an organization's roadmap for a 3 to 4 year roadmap is now a 3 to 4 month implementation cycle. From my lens, I look at that and I say, oh my goodness, well, that's a lot of risk, right? I'm in the risk management business. I mean, we all are to some degree, right? And I say, how could you possibly have a 4 year roadmap and then shrink that to 3 to 4 months, right? Can you talk a little bit about the give and takes and the balance between not only the delivery of the IT services to the organization, but the balance of the risks that you have to take as a part of that? I think that's a fascinating change, right? That occurred when the pandemic hit. Organizations are implementing technology at a much more rapid pace than they ever have been before.
So I think the key with that, so it is a major shift. There are people in the industry that, well, human beings in general, some people run towards change and others run away from it. This is a time in the industry where we need everybody who runs towards change to come forward, because it's a lot of change all at once. But the major shift there is that, and the reason why it's so mind-blowing for those of us who've been in the industry for a while is because we've always worked in a waterfall model. And we always have to do certain things at certain times in the process, especially from a risk management perspective. But we also have to shift our mindsets and align with where the software industry is going, which is agile, right? So the major concern with cloud migrations happening so quickly is we need to then in the risk industry move to the model where we're agile and making decisions with the software engineering teams and with the architecture teams and not waiting for toll gates. And that's the hardest part. The hardest part is balancing our risk decisions and our risk assessments with the speed of the organization and making sure that we enable the organization to move forward and not be roadblockers, but at the same time, we make sure that it's a secure migration over to cloud, because we all want the industry to survive. We all want our economy to survive in a secure manner. And that's, as you said, just a challenge there to figure out how that works.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest risks, and it's a phrase that usually makes me want to grab a chair before I fall down, or a fainting couch or whatever you want to call it, is when someone says lift and shift. So which has been the migration strategy, especially during the COVID situation, which basically means that they're going to take their data center deployment and they're just going to pick it up and move it up to the cloud. And some organizations will start talking about lift, tweak, and shift or something like that, where maybe they'll make some adjustments on the way to the cloud. But what the real risk there is that, and this is what in any of the conversations I've been in regards to that lift and shift strategy, has been that just remember that you're taking something that in your on-prem environment that perhaps had a web application firewall, it had IDS, IPS, it had all these bells and whistles and tools all around it, and you're moving it into an environment that you may or may not have all those services and components in place. And you're now relying on the security of the application and less relying on the tools that surround that application. So in some cases, you may be decreasing your risk, but in some cases, you may be increasing your risk based on the services and the way you're deploying. So
Yeah, there are also unintended consequences, right? When you're tweaking and you don't know what you're tweaking into it. So it could introduce some unintended consequences. You think it's making cloud isn't always better, right? So there is a issue. From a research perspective, all the risks that we've been talking about have roots. There are things in common. And also, see, I'm a researcher, so I'm looking at the financial industry and the mission critical applications, that there's a link there. And I was wondering, say, why things that we do, actually we see in production, and there is no risk. For example, blockchain. So I would have to bring blockchain into the discussion. So why blockchain? There's no teller. There's the entire automated transaction processing system. There is no really security concern other than exchanges. So exchanges. So the blockchain has the in ramp and out ramp. So those are there's like a Coinbase and the Binance, and those are the on ramps. So attacks happen on ramp portal, but the chain itself has not been attacked. There's no DDoS on blockchain. There's no ransomware on blockchain. So why is that? So there's something that boggles my mind that my research picked on and say why blockchain doesn't have this problem, and why everybody else has financials, mission critical systems, and all this. And then also Derek talked about the threat vector. The threat vector actually grows when you actually expand your infrastructure. And then blockchain doesn't change. But why is that? What have blockchain done right that we have not done right? So that's where my research come in. So we can talk about more that as we actually get into more depths of the issues.
That's good, Justin. I definitely want to get your perspectives on. I think when we start talking about technology trends, right, blockchain, digital currencies, I'll be really interested to hear Grace's and your and Derek's perspectives on this. One other thing I think we maybe will want to talk about briefly before we maybe switch focus and talk about trends in the industries, it would be just the supply chain, right? Reliance on the supply chain. Grace and Derek talked about the continued implementation of using cloud services. Well, you know, what you're doing is you're extending your network out, right? 20 years ago, the frame around where your IT assets were within the four walls of your organization. That is no longer the case, right? As we continue to expand that supply chain. And we all know, right, you've got supply chain everywhere from Intel, who are making the chips, where they had a major issue with Meltdown and Spectre a handful of years ago, all the way to nowadays, right, you're hearing about major cloud outages, right? There's examples of Microsoft 365 had a major vulnerability that caused a lot of companies to scramble recently. So I think maybe a question maybe for Grace and Derek or Justin is, what are you seeing from this, you know, the implementation of cloud, which is the extension of the supply chain? How do you manage those risks? Because those are different risks that we weren't facing a little while back.
I think the key is to, first of all, have a plan, right? And then figure out what are the controls that are must-haves in order to approve the expansion of the network, because that's pretty much what that is, right? Putting your assets outside of the four walls of your organization. So once the key leaders in the organization then determine what the key controls are, it is then assessing the vendor, the cloud vendor, the CSP, whoever it is, against those controls, and then managing them towards those risks. And really, it's about the contract. It's about making sure that there's trust with those organizations. A key thing that a lot of organizations have started to do is put in the contract. So example, you mentioned the Office 360 outage. A lot of organizations are putting in a contract that within 2 hours of anything happening, you have to let us know. And then the organization that has that contract will then get notified within 2 hours, and then the disaster recovery plans will be initiated with the customer at that point. So there's just a lot of planning in place that didn't happen before, as to what would happen, like if then else, what would happen if this happened at the other organization, and how do we put it in the contract, and how do we make sure that we follow up and have consistent checks with them and build the relationships. So I would even say it's a lot less about the actual technology controls, because those are more obvious, and it's a lot more about planning ahead, planning for disasters, building relationships, and building trust across organizations.
But I've done a lot of studying of Buddhism, so I'll go ahead and just give the one of the topics there is life is suffering. So, you know, when you talk about third-party supply chain management, it's nothing but suffering. So, you know, so being in the AppSec space, you know, one way that I think about this is that there's a lot of discussion about DevOps and DevSecOps or SecDevOps and DevOps with security, whatever you want to call it. But the concept around that is that you have a fast feedback loop. And I think that's really the only salvation that you can have when it comes to managing your third-party risk, is that assume compromise, assume that somebody's been compromised. The question really comes down to, how are you going to react to that? Like if you know, you find out that I don't know, there's a vulnerability in Node.js, right? You have, which is a third-party library or framework for building web applications. If you find out that there's a vulnerability in Node.js, well, how quickly can you patch that when that patch comes available? And if your answer is 6 months, then you got a problem. You know, if your answer is 24 hours or 12 hours, well, that's a better position to be in. So I think you know, I think I mentioned this before too, about just supply chain in general, is that unless you are building everything from scratch yourself, you have to have some trust. And I think to Grace's point, you have to be able to trust your vendors at some level, but have that ability to verify and have contracts around what happens when that trust is broken.
It's really hard.
Yeah, I always.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I was just going to use a phrase because I work for a CPA firm, right? And I always use the phrase, Derek, you had mentioned it, and both Grace and Derek, trust but verify. You have to trust them, but you also have to verify as well. So go ahead, Justin. You were going to make a comment.
Yeah, how would you trust Intel, right? I think that was goes by your early comments, right? So how did they put the branch prediction into hardware, and then now, and the latest news that Intel actually dropped the ball. They don't want to patch the hardware anymore because it's too hard. There are too many legacy applications that don't have enough manpower to plug all the holes. So too many applications. So I think Derek's comment is well taken. Is how can you respond to these incidences? It's overwhelming. So my angle from research perspective, I think that the education industry, that we actually, professors actually is at the fault. We don't teach a student the right stuff. So for example, I give you an example. It's 2011, we invited a professor from MIT. His name is David Clark, and to Temple give a talk, keynote speech. And then during break, and he was visiting my office. So I asked him a question. Say, I've been teaching programming all my life. I asked him a question. Say, I've never taught my student how to retransmit. So I taught the networks, taught the operating system, I taught the programming. And I said, I never teach our student how to retransmit the code, retransmit data. And he looked at me, he said, hey, Justin, we don't talk about it. I said, no, you can't do this to me. Okay, so you're MIT, I can say anything without have any consequences, but you have to give me a straight answer. You're MIT, you're in charge of a TCP/IP protocol development. I remember well his papers. And he said, okay, now let me share a story with you. So one of his colleagues transmitted $20,000 from a US bank to a foreign bank. And the bank told him to take 5 days to clear. And he said, okay, this is the electronic age, right? Why take 5 days? Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 5 hours would be sufficient. Why 5 days? Now, those of you in the financial industry probably have a clear answer to that because regulations and the clearing rules and all that. Okay, but the guy was a gentleman. He took the receipt and then went back home and waited patiently until Friday, and then checked the money, wasn't still there, so not there. So the guy was pissed and take the receipt, went to the bank. What happened to my money? $20,000. They had my receipt. And what happened to my money? They said, oh, we apologize. The server went down. Something happened in the cloud. And they manually transmit $20,000 for him. And the payback literally, and it should be clear in 2 days at the desktop. And they pay him a 3 days interest. Honest to God, everything was hunky-dory. The guy take the receipt back and the bulk of David said, David, what do you guys do? Didn't you guys create the lossless money transfer protocol for the world? You know what David said? They said, wait a minute. We did not develop lossless money transfer protocol for the world. We developed lossless data transmitting protocol for the world. Now, go figure what happens. What really happened? Data cannot be lost, but money will. What happened? So see, computer science professors don't know how to answer the question. Industry, a lot of veterans, and don't know the difference between data and money. Say, oh, data is money and money is data. No. There's a difference. Data will not be lost, but money will. What happened? Why? Why in blockchain, money actually do not get lost and money gets stolen, but don't get lost. Why is that? There's something technology-wise we have not done right. We have not teaching students the right stuff. So this is where my research come along. So I say, okay, maybe there's something that fundamentally flawed in the way that we speak. I mean, not we, I say program, speak to another program. Somehow, the API, did I say API? This is like, now I'm talking geek, okay? So the API is a fundamentally flawed, and then make a Derek's security team busy like hell because obviously the job security guarantee for life, okay? So that's great news, okay? The problem is that the problem will not go away. It doesn't matter how busy you get at, and a single point of failure will actually grow as you increase your infrastructure size. Your problem, you handle more customers, you add more servers, your attack vector grows. Am I right, Derek?
Yep.
That's a problem.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we were talking earlier about you know, kind of piggybacking on that about, you know, security is always a trade-off, or I should say technology is a trade-off between performance and security, right? And like when we talk about Spectre and Meltdown, you know, especially with Spectre, you know, the architecture for the Intel chip was designed to add performance. It wasn't designed to add security.
Yeah.
And that trade-off is, you know, is a constant battle, especially.
It backfired, man. It backfired, right? So that's another misnomer in education. So we don't teach students actually performance and reliability can be gained together. We don't teach that. We say, oh, you have to get performance, you have to lose the reliability. You get reliability, you have to lose performance. You get a security, you have to lose performance. You get a performance, you have to lose security. These are wrong things. Okay, so there are ways we already know. You see, like the internet, okay? Internet is growing like crazy, right? So do we lose performance? Really? Do we lose reliability of the internet? You see, I pinged Shanghai like a day ago. Okay, a year ago, ping Shanghai take like 30 milliseconds. Okay, so and now ping Shanghai is like microseconds. Okay, so much faster. So you can get performance and reliability at the same time. It's just we're not doing the right thing. So the key is in, say, that's my only one voice. Okay, you don't have to listen to it. But my research angle is the API is the key of problem. So we have something wrong in API. So making the high level superstructure all busy like hell, but the problem keeps growing. Okay, so that's what the yes, go ahead, Chris.
So of course it's possible, Justin, but anything's possible if you have a lot of time. But the challenge we face in industry is really security balance with performance, balance with speed, and doing things quickly in a secure fashion and not reducing performance. So to your point, if academia teaches how to do that more efficiently, it would be great. But in the industry today, it's really just this constant balance of figuring out like which one do we choose and what do we sacrifice for each other.
Right, right.
Hey,
I
I
think
have a
that's
class that
yes.
I have a class that teaches that. So just so.
Oh wow.
No, but you know, I mean, that's, and this is shameless plug here, but I mean, you know, for me and Justin, to your point, you know, it's about teaching secure coding habits early on, or secure architecture, secure design, secure coding early on, so that when engineers get out into the real world and they're developing code, that they're taking at least the concepts around. They don't have to know how to stop a cross-site scripting or a, you know, a DDoS or you know, any of that stuff.
End
They
to
just
end,
need to
right?
know that
End
it's
to end.
right.
So security had to be end to end. I'm secure with Derek, and if Grace in between, I cannot trust Grace. Okay, I'm only know Derek. So Grace in between and Derek and me, and I'm not sure about that. The comment said it had to be end to end secure. Yes. So that's what's we got wrong in the first hand. So it is. I think that there was the misnomer. The reason the problem is very hard, and then everybody want to take a shortcut. Industry obviously say we don't have a 10 years, 20 years to spend on research this problem. This problem is way too hard. Now let's separate it. So let's handle security problem on its own. Let's handle reliability on its own. Let's handle security problem on its own. Now those silos actually was the root of the problem, and really should not be the silos. Security team should talk to the API team. API team should say, hey, what's my consequence of my API? So I'll give you an example, like AWS have a new Lambda function called the serverless function. Okay, so it improves reliability, but the performance is 7 times down. Okay, so how does that work for you? It doesn't help you. Doesn't help you much. Okay, I'm moving my application to the cloud, and I want to use your serverless function because if a server goes down, and I'm in big trouble. So I want to use the serverless function because my server can be anywhere else. Okay, but my performance is going to 7 times slow. I'm going to use it now. And also, I have to depend on your API. And if you deplatform you, I'll be dead. So that's a big problem. I don't want to do that. Say I move to Amazon cloud, and then I'm stuck with you. I wanted to say, once you guys go down, I want to move to Google. If Google stopped, I want to use Google. Okay, maybe I'll use Azure, you know, maybe I'll use some smaller providers, and maybe I'll use Bitcoin miners. You know, those are the hardware I can use, I can deploy it. So the problem is that industry want to lock in. So Amazon want to lock in with Amazon API. Okay, Google want you lock in the Google API. So in my teaching, I resist teaching of those APIs. Okay, so I introduce them, but you are on your own device to figure out. But I will not enforce students to learn those things. I did get a complaint. It says, "Oh, Dr. Shi, you don't let us learn the latest technology." I think that they're poisons. Okay, they might kill you one day.
Yeah, and to kind of go back to, you know, I think that's why it's important to learn the concepts of security when you're developing and designing and architecting, because I don't, like, I took my computer science undergraduate. I'm not going to age myself, but it was a long time ago, and there was no security course. And you know, my graduate degree was in cybersecurity, but that was, you know, much more recent. So we're not teaching these things. And you know, to Grace's point, security does not get a lot of time and budget. In fact, this morning I was looking over my own security organization's budget compared to industry, you know, standard, and we're pretty much on par with industry standard, but it's a low number, you know, and so we don't get a lot of budget. And then, you know, and Grace, I'm sure you're in the same boat with that. And then of course you're always playing catch up with everybody else, because especially with the engineering organization, they're constantly moving in 10 different directions, and you have to be prepared for each 10 of those with a minimum budget. So
yeah, so reliability.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say historically that's the case, but I think the big banks are really getting on board
Yeah.
with giving security more of a budget.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and they have been over the past, I would say, 8 years or so. I'm really
I would agree it's
increasing-
getting better, but the sliver is just, it's still, it compared to like the overall IT budget, it's such a small line item there, you know, and yes, it
Sure.
has been growing. You know, and I've talked to organizations where they have, you know, the guy that's the security person for the entire organization. Whereas, you know, they have 100 developers, but one guy that's in charge of security. And I think that balance is where, you know, we're out of
Agreed.
balance.
Agreed.
I will tell you, I'm smiling listening to you, Derek and Grace, about this. Right, I've audited and done security assessments for hundreds of financial institutions in the last years, and I've never met a CISO who said, "Oh, I've got plenty of budget." Right? They've never ever said that. They're always saying, "Hey, I am always asked to do more, and with the same amount of budget, or you know, not as much as they would always want." Right? And then you flip that around, and you maybe talk to a CIO or a business lead. In their perspective, maybe they keep asking for more budget. I don't see it, right? You know, I don't see the value there in security. I think some organizations, it's sort of like buying insurance to some degree. How much do you need to spend, right? Organizations we as individuals don't like to buy any more insurance than we really feel like we have to until we have a major problem, right? And then you're really glad you had that, right? So again, it goes back to that balance of, you know, balancing the budget is such an important piece. Because no system that you deploy will ever be risk-free. The only system that is risk-free is a system that doesn't work for the business or for the users. So there's got to be that balance there.
Oof. Speaking of major problems, do we want to share any type of major industry
Breach,
breaches?
yeah.
No.
No? How big
Yeah,
is
there's
the
plenty
problem?
there's plenty of them out there. Well, what would, you know, we were talking about supply chain earlier, and not that this isn't necessarily related to fintech, but I know Apple just had their proprietary schematics and designs stolen and held for ransom. Now that's a big company that's you know, it was stolen from a third party in I forget, it was Taiwan or something like that. The company was located. It was a third party that somebody was able to get in through them, get to the Apple content and steal it. And so, you know, that that was just the other day. And then of course, you know, the story about JP Morgan over the summer was a big one as well. You know, there's tons of security breaches we could talk about, but none that I can talk about with my company, that's for sure.
Agreed.
I'll give you one. Go
ahead, Trey.
Go ahead, Grace.
No, go ahead.
I'll give you one. This happened years ago, right? And I was doing a security assessment for an organization, and they were standing up a new portal, customer interface portal. And this is over 5 years ago. And I warned them. I said, "Hey, you're not doing secure code reviews." You know, and they were actually taking payment card transactions via this portal. Well, the marketing folks didn't like the look and feel of the hook into the Chase Payment Tech service. So they decided that they didn't like the look and feel. It didn't fit with their brand. So they were going to have IT custom code everything, and not the call to Chase Payment Tech was doing different. Well, little behold, fast forward 6 months after my preliminary security assessment, guess what? They found out they had a data leak because it was instead of a get, it was a put inside of the coding logic. And what that did is that displayed a bunch of information, plain text in the URL. Again, that was fascinating to me, right? Coming back to something very simple, right? That Derek talked about before, secure coding principles, right? Hey, how are you making sure that marketing doesn't have too much power over how this website looks and feels and evaluating it? It came to burn this company. They lost a lot of payment card transaction records, and it turned out to be a nightmare to them. But that's just one example that very basic and blocking, tackling controls that like Derek and Grace and Justin have been talking about can rear their head really quickly and it happens time and time and time again. The misconfigurations with these systems.
It's very common, actually. Misconfiguration, as Chris said. A simple security peripheral scan should find out, but some people just don't do it.
In there about the legal side of this. I'm not sure where that comment came from, right? The laws are deterrent. What was the comment there? I don't know, maybe Grace or Derek, right? I also do a lot of continuous compliance work with organizations, right? And if you think about fintechs, for example, they've got a really cool tool or service that they're going to try to hook into an established bank or an insurance organization or an asset management organization. And I think compliance for them, demonstrating compliance, is a big challenge, right? Because again, it goes back to that balance. But as you're trying to innovate, the institutions are trying to innovate and get more creative with the solutions they provide for their organizations. You see these fintechs come in, but I also oftentimes find that maybe they don't have all of the great controls. Grace, you talked about having controls and trust and verification in the past. And so how do you manage that, where they may have this killer service that will make you leapfrog your competitor, but they don't necessarily have the compliance chops, right, to handle the legal requirements, or, in the banking world, right, that the OCC, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve will come in and beat them up really bad. So how do you manage the fintechs coming in and the security and compliance and trust you need to have as you sort of get them woven into your service production lifecycle?
So that is the major issue, especially for the financial industry, because not only we have all these regulators from all over the world, and really a lot of companies are global now. So regulators from every part of the world have different rules and different stipulations for meeting. And then you have a fintech coming in with this amazing technology, and it looks good for the bank. But the challenge, as you stated, is how do you fit that in? And how my experience has been, how we fit it in is then assessing them before we agree for them to come into the bank. So assessing them against the highest priority of controls that we have. I say highest priority, but really the basic controls, which are our highest priority. Do you do these, and how do you do this? Trust and verify. And then we can say, all right, let's go through the contract and then come in. What usually ends up happening, though, that I've seen in my experience, is that the amazing technology that they had usually diminishes by the time that they put in all of the controls that we've asked them for. So then you figure out, was it even worth it to do that? In some cases it is, some cases it's always worth it from a security perspective, but is it worth it from a bottom line perspective? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And that's as the companies mature, as the industry matures, these are the things we have to look at. All right, so after we do all that, yes, it's more secure, but is the return on investment the same? No, then leave it on the table. And starting to do these things earlier in the process helps a lot more over the past few years. But in the past, it was doing it after they join, and then you realize, you've wasted this money trying to get them secure and not really with a big return.
Wow.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish, and then we're going to go towards
Sure.
Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to say that, it's the same thing where these small fintechs are typically 10 people in a garage, and they got this great idea, and the CEO is the one that's making code commits, and you do not have a dedicated security person on that team. So when there's an evaluation of that fintech, you're going to find a lot of gaps in their security. And if you're, let's say you're integrating them, or you're acquiring them, or something like that, you take the responsibility, especially if you're, what I would call skinning them, like you're putting your label on top of theirs. That's your problem now. It doesn't matter whether it's Joe's fintech, application. It's now yours because you're integrating with them. Anybody that's worked in engineering or a development shop, the customer doesn't care whose problem it is when your application doesn't work. It's your problem. It could be a third party. It could be, you know, something completely out of your control, but it's still your problem because your app is down. So it's the same thing when you integrate with a fintech or acquire one. It becomes your problem. So to Grace's point, you want to make sure that you're doing as much due diligence up front to ensure that what you're inheriting is you know, up to your standards.
Yeah, pick up that as there's a question on the floor and asking what 5G had to do with this. 5G, in my opinion, will exacerbate all the problems, make problem happen even faster and more grandiose. So now there was another question is what do students have to learn from this point onwards? And also the question on how the laws would determine all this. So my observation is the laws are always too slow. Okay, the criminals are always one step above before the law, and so you want to depend on the law to the regulation to hamper down. Well, help, but it's not going to happen in reality much. Okay, what I think that what students should learn is something called the end-to-end encryption had to be in every system, and you have to do security privilege check, and you have to do the end-to-end checkout. So that's end-to-end design had to be in every system, and everybody has to be aware of this. Students, they have to know entire whole stack of coding. Okay, not just only one language, you have to learn the whole stack from beginning to the end. Now you know what are the weak links. Otherwise, you only know one piece and you cannot know where other things are going wrong. So the whole thing is dependent, right? It's a one link break that and the whole thing falls apart. So there's something called the single point of failure. It's really hard to eliminate. And industry kind of turn a blind eye on this right now. I mean, I'm talking technology industry, okay, not the financial industry. Financial industry really cannot help because they actually have to use the technology produced by the tech companies. Tech company turn a blind eye on this. So this is like, oh, that's what the best we can do. Guess what? Maybe you can do better, right? so look at the blockchain. Blockchain at least demonstrate, even the performance is really bad, but it shows that it's secure. Okay, it's a pretty reliable. Okay, any statistician will not believe this can happen, right? If you're a statistician, you say, how is that possible to have a 100% reliable general ledger? Statistician said, no, it's impossible. Theoretically, it's impossible, but in practice, it happened. There's a ledger, and we never get lost. But why? So we need to dive into these details, and we'll learn a lot more, and we know what's going wrong with the current. I have to go back to my old point as the API is wrong. So the student have to learn API. You have to learn lots of APIs and figure out what's wrong, what's right. I think that's what the student has to learn. So you have to learn lots of APIs and learn what is right and what's wrong.
I have a question that's sort of towards compliance. So we talked about technologies, and then we talked about offering a service and the performance that it's affected by the security controls that we put in place. But aren't some of these controls mandatory? Like in order to be compliant with all the laws that certain industries have?
Compliance is a moving target, right, Chris? So, and it's usually depending on what type of compliance framework and what type, what it is, it's a snapshot in time. And, today could be one thing, tomorrow it could be something different. So I think compliance is a good way to get a general measure of how security is implemented in a given product or an application, but it's one piece of that pie.
Yeah, Derek, I agree with you, right? So think about Best Buy when they got hacked years ago, right? They were PCI compliant, but that doesn't mean they were fully bulletproof secure. The concept we, Baker Tilly in the CPA profession, use when we do assessments or test reports is we use reasonable, but not absolute assurance, right? There's an element of reasonableness, and to Derek's point, the second you do a vulnerability scan and patch that, tomorrow new vulnerabilities are identified and that report's old. So it's this constant moving target here. I'll maybe give, I know we're running up on time here in a few minutes, but I will also say to that point, right, one of the questions in here was, what does the future look like for those going to school right now, those at Temple looking to get into cybersecurity? I would say the future is bright, because what Derek just said, it's a constant moving target. It's constantly evolving. Every day I learn something new, right? And there's many different roads you can take within the cyber umbrella to live a great and have an awesome career, right? Whether it be on the technical side with Justin doing the research at the API or the TCP/IP layer, or the business side, or the regulatory and legal side, that is constantly changing. And anything few and far in between in there. So I would submit to you this. I think security there's also a huge need in the marketplace right now for good security practitioners, right? We, Baker Tilly, are looking to hire a bunch of people in this space. The war for talent out right now is very real, right? There's a lot of people clamoring, their supply and demand. There's a lot of demand, not enough supply right now for qualified cyber practitioners. So again, I think for those of you who are talking about this or interested in this space, the future is so bright for you, because there's a massive need for brilliant minds to come in and solve these problems.
Yeah, and hiring continues to be a top risk for almost every organization when it comes to cybersecurity. There's way too much work, not enough people. And honestly, what it comes down to is, even when I think about my last few hires, even with my own team, they haven't been, the Top Gun security people. It's, do you know development, and I can teach you security. So because we've been struggling to keep up with the demands of the engineering side of the house. So I say this at the end of every one of my courses that I teach at Temple, that look, if you want job security, go in, keep expanding your knowledge in this space, keep, trying to progress towards a security career, because it's not going away.
Ooh, so let's do a quick round robin. What are the skill sets that you're looking for? What's that unicorn?
I mean, I can start. I think for me, it's, somebody that knows how to develop code, and that knows how to develop code securely. And that's been the real challenge, is finding somebody that, not to belittle other branches of the security armed forces here, but there's a lot of people that know how to penetration test. There's a lot of people that can do SOC analysis work. There are very few people that know how to develop secure code. And not only that, but be able to tell others how to develop secure code. So that's been a real challenge, at least in my perspective, that we have a lot of pen testers, we have a lot of SOC analysts, we have a lot of leadership and things like that, but we don't have the talent on the engineering side that I think we need.
What about you, Chris and Justin? What do you think? Skill sets?
So I think you need the operating system, right? You need how to understand network works, need how the operating system works. You need to know how programming and scripting, particularly, I think in the security space, scripting is more important than programming, isn't it? How to develop a secure scripts, not being exploited easily, and do not get into any open free package readily, and without going through checking and figure out what it's really doing, and without knowing the API ins and out, and you cannot deploy that. So you have to check them out, right? So I think the basic thing. So I have to know whole full stack from beginning to end, from web down to operating system kernel, including networking.
I'll take a little bit different stance than maybe Derek and Justin is. From my lens, again, you got to remember what I do, right? It's slightly different than what Justin and Derek do, right? I assess organizations. I look for just characteristics in an individual's sort of DNA: lifelong learner, inquisitive, good communication skills, right? And because you've got to balance in IT and cybersecurity is one component of a broader business equation that we're trying to solve here, right? And you also need you need exactly what Justin said, exactly what Derek said, but you also need those others who can actually pull others together, understand enough about the technology to be dangerous, but grab the parties together so they can actually have shared a mutual understanding of the risks that they're facing. So they can actually have these conversations. How do you balance this all out in a way that the business can make money and serve their clients or their customers, right? And feel good about it in a compliant way. It's hard. So there is a huge need for people who get all of that, but also they need that communication skill to wrap everyone around and bring them together as well.
Yeah, very good. Yes.
I've always heard that it's a lot of science and a little bit of art.
Yep.
Yes,
Folks?
you got
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Very true.
So we have 2 minutes left. Any closing comments? And before you close the comments, I have to thank you in case we run out of time. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. So any closing comments?
It's a fun space to be in. That's all I gotta say. There's never a dull moment. I never wake up in the morning thinking about how boring my day is gonna be. So it's a fun space to be in.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Never a boring moment. There's always a challenge on the horizon.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And Chris, any closing comments?
I agree with Justin and Derek. I think it makes you feel good too, because I think you're solving problem, right? And it's a journey over time as well, right? Your skills as for the students that are listening to this, right? What you think you're going to be doing in your career, let's say that the year or two after you graduate, in 10 years down the road, is going to be drastically different. You're going to build up these skills over time, and you're going to have these great life experiences. And the technologies are going to change, right? Justin talked about Lambda on Amazon, or name the Azure function for Microsoft. Those technology constantly changes, so you're just going to have to continue learning. If you like learning, this is the right place to be. I'll tell you that.
Thank you so much for everybody joining. Thank you for everybody that's helps organize this, and thank you for all your support. And please connect with our panelists through LinkedIn. And see you in September 30th.
That's good.
Next
Thank you.
Cyber Lunch. Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank you all.